Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is a bit of a relic himself these days.
Tim Longo. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah,
that's accurate.
You want to showcase our other relic?
Yeah, we have an additional relic on here. Sorry, Alex. Just gave away your name, but
cool.
I did a little bit of quick research and I wrote up a little intro. So I'll go through it, and then as usual, I'll introduce our guest. We have a surprise guest for the listeners who didn't know this was happening. Took me a little while to coordinate with this person, so we got it going though. So we're super excited to have Alex Garden on the podcast as another one of our wonderful interviews. And so if I get something wrong in this intro, Alex, you can correct me later, but I'll just dive right in.
Yeah, well, I mean, you started by insulting me, so why not? Just go for it.
Exactly. Speaking of relics, so in 1989, as far as I could tell, in 1989, Alex co-founded something called Conceptual Interface Devices, which we definitely should hear about later. And then Alex went on to actually be a game tester, I believe, which is where I started as well. So kudos to you on that. In 1992, I think, on Madden, of all things. Then was a programmer on PlayStation for Triple Play and The Divide, two games on the PlayStation, which maybe we can hear about a little bit later. In 1997, as many of you know, he co-founded Relic Entertainment with some other folks, and they began working on Homeworld, which I believe was their first game, which, as you know from our series, shipped in 1999, where he was the director of that game and also the CEO of the company and helped run the company, I believe, though the order might be in there to be clarified. He was also the director and went on to run the company on Impossible Creatures. And then also, while still running the company, contributed to some of their other games at Relic, pretty infamous games, I would say, as being an RTS fan. Warhammer 40K Dawn of War, Company of Heroes, Homeworld 2, of course. And so probably, you can give us some insights into, in a leadership role, how you're contributing to those games. From there, leaving Relic, he kept going in the executive direction. And in 2006, he went on to found Nexon North American Publishing, which would be interesting to hear about maybe. And then Microsoft is a GM of Xbox Live for a time, including, and then beyond that, going on to other divisions, including things like the music division, Zune, and much more. After that, moving to Zynga as a president there, and then outside of games, to other businesses, and other cool areas, including pizza, which maybe we'll hear some anecdotes about. I don't know. And then finally, from there, he has been a strategic advisor for more companies and names than I could list here, to be honest, if his LinkedIn is anything to be accurate about. And then I believe now is in the VC investment world on the tech side primarily, but he can clarify. But it's been quite a journey for this developer, and we are here to talk about Homeworld, but you're definitely one of the few execs we've had on. So you've had a great journey. So welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Hey, thanks for having me, both of you guys. I think that what you do is really cool, and it's a great opportunity to talk about something that was an important part of my life, and that's something I think really fondly about.
Awesome. Well, one of the ways, as I was alluding to in the intro, and we really enjoyed playing Homeworld, of course, as millions have, etc. But we'll want to talk about, obviously, that in depth as we go. But we do like to start, and the audience definitely loves to hear, especially because this podcast is dev-centric, and Brett and I are devs still to this day, how you got started. I alluded to some of your early days, but especially you going back to 89 and 92 and some, pretty far back, before actually both of us were in the games industry. So we were 96 and 98, I believe. So, what was your journey to games? How did you get into this before you started Relic?
Yeah. I got started with computers pretty much when computers got started. That's how old I am. And they played a really important developmental role in my life. There was a lot of things that I found difficult to do until I started working with computers, and in many ways that work helped clarify a lot of my thinking and the ways that I approach problem solving. It taught me a lot of structure that ended up being really healthy for me. So I had that relationship going on. I was a curious tinkerer. It didn't matter which machine I was getting my hands on. I was really curious to see how the underlying architecture of it worked, what was different between them. And these were comparisons that were pretty easy to make because these were pretty simple machines. And so assume that that's the backdrop. And as all of that was happening, I was working one night in a frozen yogurt shop, and a guy pulled up outside. Or actually, perhaps let me just take a step back before that.
I love this. Tell us more.
Yeah. Well, I was a courier actually for the Humble guys. This is way before your time. You probably don't know who that is. But back in the days when, I couldn't afford games, I learned how to crack them. And I managed to get my hands on a US Robotics 14.4 modem, which was screaming fast back at the time. And so I got co-opted into helping distribute pirated games. I was like 12, and I didn't know any better. And
you're part of the problem. I
was, yeah, guilty as charged. But it's what necessity is the mother of invention.
You do what you got to do.
Yeah, all right. I learned the error of my ways. But anyway, I knew a lot about games, and I was living in Vancouver, BC at the time, and I understood that there was a studio there called Distinctive Software. So one day I got in the bus and I went down there and walked into reception, and I said, "Hey, I'd like to talk to some of the programmers." And the receptionist, this is what the industry was back then. She says, "Okay, go sit in this conference room." And I kid you not, like Chris Taylor and a bunch of these seminal developers ambled in. They're like, what do you want? And I said, what can you tell me about how you do this? And so, we sat there and we talked. So I thought that was pretty cool. So anyway, one night I was working in this frozen yogurt shop, and
you got to be kidding me with this.
A guy rolls up in a Lamborghini, and I had never seen one before in person. So I walked outside and waited till the door opened, and he was talking on this giant cell phone. And I said, "Hey, my name's Alex Garden, and I want to work for you." And he said, "You don't even know what I do." And I said, I don't care what you do. You're driving a Lamborghini, so let's talk. So he said, "Well, my name's Don Matrick, and I own this company called Distinctive Software." And I said, "Great. Do you hire summer students?" And he said, "Yeah, but maybe call me when you hit puberty, and I'll see you later." So I went home that night. I got his card, and I cooked up a resume that was, a work of fiction, frankly. And I put it in an envelope from a lawyer's office that I got my hands on, and I paid a buddy of mine to hand deliver it to him. Said he was thinking he was getting process served. And he opened it, and I guess he liked the moxie. So I got a call from them, and they said, "Hey, how would you like to come work for the company? We can pay you $15 an hour." I think I was making $6 at the time. I'm like, "Yeah, that's acceptable." And meanwhile, I was doing cartwheels. So I got a job for the summer testing video games. And as a matter of fact, the first game I worked on was Omar Sharif on Bridge, which I'm sure you guys will cover at some point because it was a really seminal moment in gaming.
Actually, I was a big fan of Omar Sharif in Bridge specifically, but maybe not that game when I was learning Bridge because he's a well-known, great Bridge player.
Yeah. Okay. So there goes my joke. I thought I was being sarcastic.
No. I mean, that's that's definitely outside the box probably for the podcast. So that's going to be a hard one to track down.
Yeah. So I worked on Carmen. Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego on the Genesis? Beavis and Butthead, another real page turner. Anyway, enjoyed those games, and then went back to school and realized I hated school. So I dropped out of grade 11 and started, it's kind of a long story. I technically dropped out of grade 10, and I managed to talk my way into grade 11 and then dropped out of grade 11. So I was I decided I wanted to start my first company. So I started a company called Conceptual Interface Devices and realized that working for myself was way better than going to school. And I did that with a guy named Luke Maloney, who ended up being one of the co-founders of Zoom, of Relic. So that was really cool. So we built a product that I think people were pretty surprised that kids could build, and the paper wrote a story about us, and we got bought for not very much money, but enough to convince me that was way cooler than high school. And so I worked for the company that purchased us, and then spent the next 8 years as an engineer doing work for Radical Entertainment and Electronic Arts, and I did some contract work for NASA and JPL that was pretty cool in optics and 3D rendering engines. And then in 97, founded Relic. So that's what leads us to this conversation today.
Wow, that was quite a journey, a roller coaster ride. So yeah, I mean, 89. When I was looking at the dates, it was going pretty far back. But I guess if these are the high school years, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Okay. Wow. So how did you and your partner meet at that point? And what what was Relic? How did Relic come to be? Was it yet again work for yourself kind of attitude?
No,
or?
And actually not at all. So Luke and I were in high school, grade 10 computer science together. That's how we met. Oh. And he was a couple of years older than me, so he graduated earlier than I did. But we got along well. He was a really talented programmer and more talented than I was by a long shot. But we were we were good enough engineers that no one else in the class wanted to talk to us, so we stuck together. And and so I had that relationship, and I was working at the time as an engineer at Radical, working on the Divide, and I had some friends who had started their own game company, and they had a game they were working on, and they got themselves into big trouble. They had a milestone coming up, and their game was a sprite-based ISO game, and this is hilarious, but they had basically like a jillion sprites, and they had screwed up the format on them. So every single one was wrong, and it was wrong in it was wrong in enough ways that it was unfixable manually, and they were trying to fix it, and it was a disaster. So they called me and they said, like, can you just help us? So I said, yeah, sure. Like, I'll do it for free. So, this is what you do when you love to engineer programs. I worked a 12-hour day, and then I went over to their office and worked another 12-hour day. And we were sitting in their office, and, I remember I was drinking Coca-Colas back to back and jacked out of my mind on caffeine and working in this tiny little room with like 6 other people and writing this conversion engine that was going to strip and fix all these sprites. And we were having a conversation about the various merits of, space science fiction storylines and how X-Wing versus TIE Fighter had the potential to be really cool, but because it's difficult to represent 3D action on a 2D screen, all you really did was like wait and then go left and pull back and press fire. And that was like not really a realistic, way to experience what space combat should look like. So that led to this conversation about, well, I wonder if there's a different way to do that. And I had this, literally, I was struck by a bolt of lightning. I had this flash of inspiration. And I was thinking about Ptolemy's theory of the universe. It's a crystal sphere surrounding Earth, and the stars are pasted to the inside of the sphere. And inside the realm of the sphere is the realm of man, and outside of the realm of the sphere is the realm of God. And it struck me that the surface of a sphere is a 2D surface. And you could use the mouse to navigate a camera, which was always pointing at the center of the sphere on the exterior of the sphere, using up, down, and left and right. And it would be pretty cool. And you could use the mouse wheel to control the size of the sphere. And if there was a selection of focus within the sphere, that would be like a groundbreaking UI paradigm. No one had done anything like that before. And then it occurred to me that like if you put trails behind the ships, that would give you a temporal reference of their travel over time. And it looked like a huge ball of spaghetti floating in 0G in my mind. And actually the working title of Homeworld was Spaghetti Ball for a while until we came up with a new title for it. So I stopped and I said, like, whoa, like this is a thing. And I was kind of like obsessed with the idea, but I didn't know where to go with it, So I was finaling a game at work at the time. And then I went to EA and I was at Triple Play, and I was working at Triple Play, and I was sleeping under my desk finaling Triple Play. And literally, like, it was like, 24 hours a day at work. And I think I had gone home one morning, and my alarm clock radio went off, and it was on a classical station, and it was playing Adagio for strings in G minor in a choral arrangement by Barber. And it just a second lightning bolt. I said, holy crap, this is the theme song for the game. And it, maybe it doesn't seem so unusual now, but at the time, best in class for game audio was like, uncha, 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 boom, boom. Like there was no notion that there could be delicacy or nuance. And so I thought, well, this is really cool. So then it started coming together for me. I'm like, this is a story like Battlestar Galactica of a disenfranchised people finding their birthright, traveling across the galaxy, facing adversity. And it's a sad story. And it's a haunting story. It's not doom. We're not going to jam it down your throat. We're gonna make your heart ache. And the conflict isn't going to be the point of the game. It's just something that you have to manage, and we're going to try and highlight, the loss and the pain that goes along with it. And I thought that was a really cool way of telling a story. And there wasn't that the kind of nuance just didn't exist in gaming at the time. It just wasn't part of the storytelling zeitgeist. So I started getting more and more excited about it. And initially, so I thought, look, I went down and I talked to Chris Taylor, and he said, yeah, it's a kind of a cool idea. And there was two guys he was working with, John Maver and Greg McMartin at the time. And I said to John and Greg, hey, we should start this company. And they were like, yeah, cool. So they knew Scott Lynch at Sierra and got us a meeting with Scott, and we went and talked to him, and he was receptive. Obviously Scott is one of the guys who runs Valve now. But then here's the problem. So Chris wanted to work with John and Greg, and he was a bit pissed at me for trying to poach them. So he made them an offer they couldn't refuse, and they backed out. So here's me like sleeping under my desk at EA, filing the game, trying to put together a deal with Sierra, not knowing anything about this stuff. And my two co-founders just disappeared. So I went back to my Rolodex and I said, who do I know? Right? I know Luke Maloney from high school. I know Aaron Daly, who I helped get him a job at Radical. I know Rob Cunningham. He was my art teacher, taught me about life drawing. I know this guy, Aaron Kambitz, who was a guy I worked with at Radical. He's a really good artist. And, these guys have gone on to be like literally some of the top leaders in the industry now in their fields. Mm-hmm. So there must have been something in the water, but I had them all over my house for pizza one night. And I said, my tiny apartment. And I said, okay, let me tell you a story. And I played the song. And I said, everybody close your eyes. And I just told them the story of the game. And Rob in particular, who's a master storyteller, he was just like captivated. And he's like, holy crap, this is amazing. So I said, look, guys, if I pay for you guys to come down with me, if we drive down to Seattle, will you come to a meeting at Sierra with me where I try to convince Scott to take a risk? And they said, okay. So I used the last, literally 2 nickels I could rub together. And we all rode down there and we walked into Sierra's office. It was on a Saturday. Scott was late. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. But we all sat down around this table. We had a bunch of concept art that the guys had done. And I told Scott, hey, this is the situation. And he said, I kind of came into this conversation expecting to give you a no. But you've given me a lot to think about. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. So we left. And I was pretty convinced at that point it was going to be a no, and that this was like a catastrophe, because Radical had found out that I was doing this and said, you're dead to us. You can never work here again. And EA had found out I was doing it and said, as soon as you final this game, you're fired. Hilarious. So I had, no high school education. The 2 game companies in Vancouver weren't going to hire me again. And I thought I had really screwed it up. And we were walking through the mall, actually in Bellevue, Bellevue Square parking lot. So I thought maybe we'll go look at things I'll never be able to afford to buy again. And my phone rang, and it was Scott, and he said, all right, we'll take a risk on you. We're going to fund you for a prototype. We'll give you $100,000, 3 checks, $50,000, $25,000. You got 3 months to put something together. And if you do, we'll talk about a deal. So one of the most incredible moments of my life.
Wow.
And off we went. So I like to joke that Homeworld was a 50,000 line demo with a 1 million line patch on top of it. None of us had any idea what we were doing. So we wrote this demo and we went down to Sierra and they said you have to do a PowerPoint presentation, which I had never done before. And they said, and we'd done this demo that was like a multiplayer 2-person head-to-head Homeworld.
Oh, it was multiplayer first.
Well, because we didn't have time to write any AI, so we just wrote a networking layer into this multiplayer. So we rolled these two like CRT televisions into the room on big AV carts, and we walk in there with the first meeting of the day, and everyone's in a shit mood, and it was like Jane Jensen, like Al Lowe, Roberta Williams, Ken Williams, Scott Lynch. Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. And so we tried to do this PowerPoint presentation, and I still to this day don't know what happened, but literally the slides came up in the wrong order. So like it was a disaster. And Scott's looking at me like, oh, for crying out loud, right? So then he goes, whatever, just show us the game. So we open the game, and it looks shitty, right? Because it looks like a static bitmap on both screens, and then people are just like, oh my God, what the hell is this crap? And then we move the camera. And the moment we moved the camera, I will never forget this. Everyone like sat up out of their seats and leaned forward. Oh. And by the end and we played one match, and it was just like, I think like 3 units and really basic. And we played one match. And by the end of it, everyone in the room was out of their chairs going, yeah, get up. Ah! And all this ranting and raving. And we finished and we left. And as we were walking out of the room, I heard Ken Williams, right, founder of Sierra. I heard him say to Scott, "Well, this isn't going to be a difficult decision," and it was like surreal, right? So we got our deal. Gosh. Yeah, it was amazing. So we got our deal, and we went to work on the game. And I'll just give you one more vignette to give you a sense of what this was like. So none of us had any idea what we were doing. We were just making this stuff up. And we get invited then by Sierra. The game's looking better and better. They want us to go to E3, which was in Atlanta back then. And so we go to E3, and like we were in the bad hall, like the third hall, and not just in the third hall. We were in the back of the third hall, and we had like 2 monitors, right? And so on the first day, like we were the only people there. And, like the janitor would come by and we would pitch in. Like it was, but people sort of filtered around. But word started to spread. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, what do I know about this stuff? Word started to spread. And by the end of the 3rd day of E3, we were doing demos 8 hours a day with 50 people packed around both of these monitors. And it was a surreal experience. Like people were going crazy about it. And at the end of the last day, this guy comes up to me, this English accent, and he says, "Hey, listen, I just want to tell you how important this game is. It's completely changed the way that I think about making games. It's going to totally transform the way I approach my next one, which I'm happy to show you if you want to come and see it." And I said, "Oh, yeah," because I'm on autopilot. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, great. Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. Really cool." My name's Alex. And he goes, "Yeah, my name's Peter Molyneux." And I just about... And so he was making black and white. So he took me into this room and showed me black and white. And I was just like, I can't, like, I've been playing your games for 10 years. Like, I can't even process this, Yeah. So we won Game of Show. And then, the rest is history. And then it was Game of the Year when it came out. And there's lots of, it was great, of course, but there's lots of baggage as a designer that goes along with that you have to live with and overcome as well. So there was, it took us a little while as a studio to find our way after that big first success. But yeah, that's how it started.
Holy cow, Alex. I've been enraptured and smiling. You can't hear it through the mic, and it's so fascinating. So we talked about in the first episode of the series, of course, we talked about the first moment you move the camera. Mm-hmm. And to have you talk about that in terms of the first pitch, essentially, to Sierra, and that moment being so magical, because we talked obviously about the RTS space at the time and before, and we have questions for you about sort of like challenging those assumptions and really, to be honest, during your time at Relic and beyond, I think Relic has always done a good job at trying to challenge RTS, specifically that genre assumptions. But that camera movement, to know that there was a moment like that for the people who funded you initially, just like there is for the player, is so magical. It's just so special. So thank you for, sharing that. I can't believe how young you were too, dude.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, one of the advantages of not knowing what you're doing is you don't know how hard the things that you're attempting to do really are. Yeah. And, I'll never forget, who's the wing commander guy? Chris
Roberts.
Chris Roberts. Chris Roberts said at the time, it's impossible to tell a story about space like this. And by the way, I'm a huge Star Citizen fan, so let's be clear here. But if you remember at the time, Wing Commander was kind of considered best in class for storytelling in space, and he had a lot of really negative and pejorative things to say about what we were doing. But now, if you look at any movie, period, or television show or game that deals with space combat, every single ship has a trail. Mm-hmm. And you might think, but that we did that, right? We created it because it creates a reference for the movement of something over time in a void.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of things that that we invented that became really important just because we didn't know that they were hard. And there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, not knowing for sure, diving in and taking those risks. I mean, and your story about the sphere and the concept of the camera, obviously we dwelled, because part of the point of our podcast is to kind of deep dive into stuff that a lot of other gaming centric podcasts don't, because we're developers. So we talked a lot about that revelation, and now that you've described the lightning bolt moment for you, it's really fascinating because I was a big StarCraft fan as a player and a developer at the time, but there were certain norms when it comes to how to deal with units in a two-dimensional isometric space. But coming to the conclusion, and it's great to hear that it was one of those revelation kind of moments where it kind of just came to you. It's really significant because it was very much, I remember, because both Brett and I were at LucasArts when it came out, and I remember playing it while we were there too, and us playing multiplayer together, and everyone in the office playing it. And there's always as developers, there's always those times when you think to yourself, how do you get here? Because it's the sort of like, I wish I would have thought of that moment, right? And that's what probably Peter was saying too, right? And it's so great to hear the inspirational moments, and the music as well, I think, is key. And I'm also very happy to hear you talk about the story so much, because you were joking about the heavy metal guitar, and the sort of tone of the days, because some of the questions I have in here for today, if we get to them, are about tone, because the game stood out in such a special way in that regard, and I think it still holds up because
one of the things
was important.
Yeah, and one of the things I hope we get a chance to talk about is why it was important, because to this day, almost no one understands why. And in fact, honestly, I think some of the founders of Relic still don't completely understand why. And I didn't understand why at the time, but it came to me years later why it worked and why it was so important.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
Do tell.
Yeah, well, so
Sits up straighter.
I'll start by saying that if you guys were at Lucas at the time, that you indirectly inspired our work, because if it hadn't been for X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, I wouldn't have thought of this.
That was one of the games I tested.
Yeah. Well, so you won't, as weird as this sounds, you had a hand in the origin of the game.
Well, honestly. Totally Games. They were the developer, but I was lucky enough to be a tester. Yeah. But yeah, go for it.
Well, so look, maybe you guys have a different origin story than I do. You sound very cool. I was not very cool as a kid, and I came from a pretty rough family background. Didn't have a lot of support there. We moved a lot, and I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I felt really disenfranchised. I didn't feel part of a community. I didn't feel like I related to my peers, and maybe that's why I enjoyed working with computers so much. And, I felt, as a computer-centric science fiction nerd without a lot of friends at the time, as you can imagine, it wasn't like a super welcoming, day-to-day existence, right?
Oh, I'll try to imagine that.
Yeah, give it a shot. See if you can.
I think Brett's pretty much
while you stroke your neck beard.
His language.
Yeah, exactly. So, but here's the thing. Deep down inside, it's the dream of every person like that to believe that you can apply yourself and you can overcome those beginnings, and you can become not just successful and popular, but you can actually find a place in the world. And in fact, maybe, you could realize that it wasn't you, actually, it was everybody else. And it just took some time for the world to realize that. And Homeworld, I directed the game, right? So I should know this, but I didn't know this at the time. Homeworld was my origin story, right? Disenfranchised people who've had everything taken from them, stripped from their birthright. They're not even aware that that's the case, but there's this latent greatness hiding that one day they inadvertently stumble across, and they go off on this journey that requires unbelievable bravery, facing impossible odds, set against by the entire universe who's trying to stop them from achieving their goal, but they persevere. And it is a sad journey. It's not a heroic journey. It's a sad journey, and it's a lonely journey, and it has tremendous suffering and pain and hardship and sacrifice. But at the end of that, you discover there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And actually, not only have you found a happy ending, but actually you found that all along you were in the right, and you do belong. And there's something really special and valuable about the effort that you've made, and it all feels like it's worth it in the end. And I think that inadvertently, Homeworld was the Breakfast Club of our gaming generation. It was this redemption story about being an outsider and a loner and an individual. And it was a way for you to mourn that process. And I think that's why it hit people so hard, honestly, the people who loved it.
Mm-hmm. Homeworld is the Breakfast Club of our game. That's a quote there, sir.
Yeah, it's okay to be a loser, and actually, you know what? You're pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely obviously talked about I think it's the second mission or maybe the third mission with the cryo. The cryos,
yeah,
the cryo banks or whatever they were called. Yeah. And, the reason I brought up StarCraft earlier is because, Blizzard, very well known for their style of storytelling, and, God love them. They do a thing and they do that well. But for me as a player at the time, though also a developer, but mainly as a player, the sorrowful aspects of the game and the tone was really refreshing in a way, even though it was sad. And that mission, just having Command saying in a very almost tranquil voice what was happening, as these trays of people, and quantifying how many people. And then this concept, which we definitely need to talk about, today at some point, maybe now, but of persistence, where RTSs weren't about that, right? It was very mission based. It was very like start over, rebuild. And this sense, to your point, with the themes you were just talking about, has so much more gravity, no pun intended, with having this sense of everybody I lose, I'm not going to get a replenishment for, even though, mechanically it's not exactly true, but you know what I mean? It's like, there's this sense of every life is precious, and you're carrying that from mission to mission to mission to the end.
Yep.
And the name of the game is the context you need, right?
That's right.
It's all in one word, really. So yeah, it's fascinating to hear
and the logo as well, right? Because the angel moon above the planet with the wings coming down, it's all the same metaphor.
Yeah, it's very cohesive. We often talk about, because obviously for the podcast we're going back and playing classic games of all genres and all the way back in different eras, and cohesive games come up a lot, right? Elegant games come up a lot.
Yeah, it was important to us that there was a thread that tied it all together, and that it felt like it was one end-to-end experience, and that there was a reason for everything, right? Form followed function. So, we didn't want things in the game. For example, this notion that I think if you had reset the unit count, it makes balancing a million times easier in RTS. That's why they do it. But if we reset the unit count at the end of a mission, how could we ever have claimed there was continuity to the story? Like, it just made no sense. So we had to come up with a dynamic balancing system, because you just couldn't do static unit counts. It just wouldn't work, right? So we had to write, and it sounds stupid to say it now because everyone does that, but they didn't exist at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. We definitely have questions about the dynamic difficulty scaling. Because it can get punishing, right? If you're not aware of,
well, that's right. Actually our naivete as developers, because you know how this goes, right? You guys were in tests.
So totally.
Once you've played something 1,000 times, it doesn't matter how hard it is, you're good at it.
We had a suspicion.
We just kept cranking up the difficulty. It was like, this is too easy. But dirty secret, I actually never played Homeworld through end to end. I didn't do it again until Randy and the Gearbox guys rebuilt it, because I just played it one mission at a time in debug, because I didn't have time to do the end-to-end run through. So I actually didn't realize how bad it was until after we shipped it.
Yeah. That happens. Yeah.
Common thing for sure. Yeah.
And that story is common for the podcast too, because when we for instance, XCOM for Julian Gallup. Yeah. I mean, we talked about sort of some of those same sort of,
we've had the same thing happen, of course, in our own development careers. I can remember a level in Republic Commando where, just having different sorts of people play your game can point these things out as well. But there was a designer on the team who I loved to death. I've worked with him tons. But his level was too hard. And he'd go and he'd play it with like basically one-handed. I'd be like, okay, yeah, but you just play differently than I do. Like whatever your priorities are different than mine. And so I don't even see what you're seeing that makes it easy. So there are people who are not going to find it that way. And it feels like RTSs can be that way as well.
One of the lessons is you are not the target audience. Right? You have to understand that you're not making the game for you or people like you or even anyone you know. Yeah, you're making it for people who have no context and they're supposed to enjoy themselves. So your job is to make it just difficult enough to make it feel like there's some dynamic tension in it and no more difficult.
Yeah. Well, and going back to your point about the persistence from unit persistence or what have you, I don't think we talked about it this way, but now that you mention it, it is very logical and kind of, I don't know. For when I was talking about it during the series, I was definitely giving it major kudos as bucking a trend in a very intentional way. But when you describe it the way you just did a couple minutes ago, it's like it couldn't have been any other way based on the story and based on the context. And I don't think
we'd be having this conversation if we had done it the other way, because the story would have felt like one experience on rails and the game would have felt like another one, and they would have been loosely coupled in a way that wouldn't have made you feel personal about it.
Yeah. And it's so rare. Like we always, as developers, we're always trying to find ways to make sure, it's the cognitive dissonance between what the player's doing in the story and all of those different kind of, those marriages are really hard usually to get, especially if you're not thinking it through whatever genre you're in, what you're thinking it through from the beginning, especially in action games. And to have it be so tightly coupled in this case, I think is another standout reason that it's so memorable. And,
well, we tried to do that with the cinematics as well, right? Which was, we tell the story and then we just unletterbox it and you're in the game. And we carried that through. I think the best time we ever did that was with the Company of Heroes intro. And because it was, the rendering that made it possible to do the real-time portion of that at the time was pretty cutting edge. And the idea that you could go from a pre-rendered sequence that seamlessly cut into real-time 3D graphics, we were the first to do it. And frankly, for years, we're the only people who did it because it was so hard. But I think that also contributed to the we've been conditioned as players to think there's story, and then there's this like very thinly veiled relationship between the story and the game. And I was like, no, forget that. Let's just make them the same.
Yeah. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful, wonderful goal to go after. And I agree. I think Relic has always been known. I was also a big fan of Dawn of War.
I love that game.
And of that cohesion between the experiences of the story and the gameplay.
Dawn of War,
and you wouldn't expect it in that genre because it's, again, not
That's
to
right.
harp on Blizzard specifically, but being at one of the companies that was at the apex for RTSs, it was very much like watch these pre-rendered cinematics and now go play the game, right?
Right, and
they were
it wasn't
very
even like
separate.
the units in the game didn't even really look like the cinematic units because the proportions were different.
Right.
Yeah.
And it looked, I mean, I don't mean to, no disrespect intended to Blizzard, okay, but like StarCraft and Warcraft were literally lifts of 40K.
Yeah, for sure.
They're
very inspired. Yep.
Well, yeah, okay, you say that. I mean, I might use different words, but they and so the thing with the 40K universe is it should be like the world's richest grounds for making games, but the problem is, it's hard to get past in the grim darkness of the distant future. There is only war. Like, that doesn't leave you a lot of dynamic range after that, So when we wanted to make Dawn of War, I said, look, briefing for the game, Silo of Blood. Like, we're not going to make it gory, but we're going to go outside of Relic's comfort zone and make something that's way over the top, like hyper violence, but in a approachable way. Which, imagine that design briefing meeting people. What the hell are you talking about? But
you got to make it cuddly,
Yeah, that's right. But my favorite part was, we made this unit to unit interaction that was really special, and I think that's where the magic came from. So the first time you see a force commander take a power hammer and swing up on top of a blood demon and smash it into the ground, you're like, I mean, these are finishing moves you'd see in Mortal Kombat at the time, and we were doing it in RTS games, and it made it feel so delightful,
Yeah.
And yeah, it's special.
Well, it's interesting, and I think Company Heroes as well. I think it's interesting to hear, in a way, how Homeworld did set a sort of foundational, I don't know, ethos or some sort of fancy word that I want to use there that carried through, sort of studio pillars, right? Like, you probably didn't know it at the time, but it seems like some of the choices you were making, things like having story and gameplay be cohesive, having themes mean something, and like, for instance, in Company Heroes, the morale system and kind of all of that stuff that really does impact war, but is almost never in an RTS, and ended up becoming a very impactful, I think, an important part of the cohesion of a World War II RTS because war is so terrible,
Well, and so our design, one of our design ethos was what I call one revolutionary, multiple evolutionary.
Yeah.
So the idea was like, look, players can only truly wrap their heads around one fundamentally new concept per game, and that's not disrespect. It's just like, this isn't their job. So if you jam too many new concepts into a game, it's going to fail. It's supposed to be fun, but people want something new. So do one thing that absolutely breaks the mold, like really breaks the mold. And what was Homeworld? It was StarCraft in 3D.
Yeah.
Basically. So do one thing that really breaks the mold, and then do everything else better than you did it before. And so we set the bar pretty high with Homeworld. So to your point about continuity, like, of course we're going to do letterbox cinematics, right? Like, of course we're going to do, hyper realism and detail when you zoom in. And we're going to make those things better than they were in the prior games. But what was the one really revolutionary new thing? And in Company of Heroes is actually squad level tactics, right? Because how can you make a realistic World War II RTS game where every soldier is effectively moving on their own using like A-Star and it's just not that, But I said, no. These people it has to be obvious they're working together. So have them hide behind tombstones and sneak around walls, and you're commanding the squad, and it's up to the individual soldiers in the squad to do the best they can to execute the squad's goals together. Again, like, no brainer today, but at the time, no one had ever done anything like that before. Like, the AI was very, very complicated for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels different. Yeah, it felt, and that's why I like Dawn of War as well. The scale of and Dawn of War, I think, it influenced StarCraft later.
Well, it did, and also weirdly it popularized the 40K universe. It went from being hyper grognard neckbeard to being something that's like widely consumed across multiple. And that was a big deal. Like Games Workshop, it changed the whole trajectory of their company, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a fork in the road for Warhammer for sure. That was people legitimate. Yeah, people were like legitimately.
Mm-hmm. My favorite contribution is, and you may not know this, but in the 40K the Dawn of War intro movie, which we did with Blur, which I still go back and watch, it's freaking awesome. There's a scene. There's a scene where there's an orc with a flamethrower. He has the goggles on, and he has a cigar hanging out of his mouth. And you have to understand at the time, GW was like, Warhammer's canon. You can't change anything. And we were like, screw that. This guy has to have a cigar in his mouth because this is, and they were like, you know what? You're right. He does. And they changed it and they put it, and I was like, yes, we did it.
Orcs smoke cigars now.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to ask yourself, where did it come from? But it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no.
Cuba.
Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. And go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I'm curious what your, I can probably guess, but it's funny. There's nothing lonelier than space or more dangerous, really. Maybe the very deep ocean. What were your sources? I mean, what were the things that you loved from space, that you drew on? Because I don't, like the things that I think of that, as, rough contemporaries, I would have enjoyed. I don't think of it in that way. So I'm just kind of curious, what was your science fiction diet,
well, I really
to sad and lonely?
Yeah. I mean, I think I didn't realize it at the time, but I think it was just my own processing.
Just you. Yeah.
Yeah. Battlestar Galactica was a big one,
sure.
Which I think is a truly excellent story that is really underrated. But I give a lot of the credit to Rob Cunningham. Actually, there's two artists, Chris Foss and Peter Ellison, who have this. If you haven't seen it, you have to go look at just this absolutely mind-exploding seminal work on what alien civilizations and spaceships should look like, and published a bunch of books back in the day. And they were just, there's still to this day, there's nothing like them. And they weren't afraid to build ships that had color and dimension and expression in them. It wasn't just like, gray box with Lego bricks on it, which was sort of, at the time, was considered cutting edge, but they were making fantastic shapes that could never have been represented digitally at the time. And we could not get enough of that stuff. I remember showing that stuff to Rob early on and saying, this is what we need to do. And he took that and built a whole universe around it. So I give him, the lion's share of the credit for the cohesion of the universe.
Yeah, and we did talk, I think, a fair amount about the ship silhouette designs and the sort of not simplicity, but the elegance of the designs of the ships and each of the civilizations or factions or what have you, in terms of potential constraints for polygons. And there's, as developers, we look at the kind of stuff of like, okay, you have X number of polygons, you still need to make something compelling. What are the constraints you use to make something cool looking, like the mothership?
Yeah. Well, do you know why the mothership was shaped like that?
No, I don't think so.
It was the vertical axis of the world.
Yeah, of course.
Because we needed somebody to give you a reference point, right?
That's like a Guybrush story there. I don't know if you know the Guybrush story.
We can't make it a cylinder, like a 300-mile tall cylinder. So what are we going to do? And as a matter of fact, we used level of detail a lot, so that the ships would always have a distinct profile. But what you don't know is that I think there was 5 levels of detail. If you were to stack the lowest poly level of detail next to the highest one, and not scale them on a relative basis, the lowest level one was like 100 times bigger than the highest one. Wow. Because otherwise, when you zoomed out, everything would be a pixel.
Yeah, dots. Exactly. Yeah.
So we had to pick shapes that would be recognizable even when they were like 4 polygons. And so it was actually really tricky. And again, that was all Rob and Aaron who did that work.
Yeah, that's well put. And yeah, that's a great little insight story there on the scale of the ships for level of detail for the audience, for sure. People.
Yeah, I got a sense of that with the main ship, but just because when I would zoom out, I'd be like, there's no way, but it didn't register. I can remember a couple times going, how can I still see that? Like, but it never kind of came up. We don't typically talk about weird details like that, but I love hearing that they're like huge when they're far away. Totally makes sense. Yeah.
And what our thinking was, like, if you zoom in, even though you spend 90% of the time playing zoomed out, but if you zoom in and you can anytime you want, whenever you choose, and you can get the maximum level of detail, then your brain will just register, hey, that's how much detail exists there, and it will believe it's always there, no matter what happens.
Yeah,
and that was pretty key.
Totally, that's a great point about LODs in general, and I would do it all the time because I think it's just F, right? You hit F twice for focus, and you zoom into whatever you're selected, and you get that.
Yeah.
And you see the contrails going. The other thing, the other reason I did it is I wanted to hear the audio design.
Exactly, you got the audio when I got in. Yep.
Yeah,
we did something really cool. That was the Relic FD audio engine, and we were the first people to ever write a sound engine that worked in the frequency domain. And what that let us do is, it was a guy named Shane Alfreds who wrote that. And what that let us do is we were able to do really, really cool mixing effects on top of the core samples. So our actual audio sample sizes were really small, but then we could make it sound like you were speaking through a microphone or speaking through a loudspeaker, or there was crackle for radio interference, or there was and then because we were able to do so much of that procedurally, we had a huge audio library, so we could do chatter that was specific to what was going on with the ship. Is it damaged or is it not damaged? Is it in combat or not? Is the pilot like stressed out or not stressed out? And that was all procedural. And that was really cool. So we got to play a lot with creating tension in the individual unit, which you would never be able to do otherwise.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's the kind of depth that we love to get into with these interviews. Yeah,
that's fantastic. I mean, one of the things we commented a lot on was the sort of matter-of-factness of the the radio comms. It's very, like, this is what's happening. Very like professional military. Yeah, we really dug that. It's I don't.
So
the original Battlestar I don't remember super well. I mostly saw it in reruns, so it was kind of like hard to see it in order and things like that. So it kind of is a jumble in my head, but I don't remember it quite having that. It
didn't.
Yeah,
the new did a little bit more.
Yeah. And that also clouds my my memory.
Well, here's the thing, and I think the new Battlestar got this. I'd like to think they got it from us, but they got it right. If you were in fact one of those pilots, right, and you guys mentioned this earlier in the podcast, and you were fighting to protect the cryogenically frozen corpses of the children who would repopulate your race, and if you fail, you just cease to exist as a race.
Yeah,
and you're fighting for the memory of your irradiated planet, and the just overwhelming injustice of everything. What does your life matter?
Yeah,
like it doesn't matter at all.
The stakes.
It's irrelevant. Yeah, it's just about doing your job.
Yeah,
and we wanted that to kind of permeate the behavior of the pilots.
Yeah, and with each, obviously you're going to have losses along the way, and we talked about sort of like the stakes and the sort of the sorrowful tone of that. But with each success that you have with the missions, I think, as opposed to there's like you said, there's the story reasons to have the persistent unit count. There's the I'll say the unique design reasons that makes it kind of maybe kind of a unique selling point kind of feature. But then there's also the sort of like sense of accomplishment and sense of just sense of accomplishment that you're especially if you have some capital ships, right? That you've like for instance, the first capital ship that I took that I salvaged from one of the other races and I had or factions and I had for many, many missions. It did eventually get taken out, which was a very sad day. But those, that was like, it felt clever, right? I felt clever doing it.
Yeah.
I'd like to think I made up my own headcanon of like, we recruited those people inside to join us.
I had a darker view, but
yeah, that's true. You can have both, I guess. Glasses half empty, full kind of thing. But even if you had created your own capital ship, right, and you keep that coming with you, there's just that sense of like, accomplishment and expansion of.
Well, hopefully you noticed there was a bulge where some of the missions, if you had really bulked up a capital ship, some of the missions in like the third to the later part of the game were easy because we wanted you to feel like I've earned the right to steamroller my way through this.
Oh, I wish I would have seen that.
Yeah, I would say we both found as well. We got a hint from a listener about like how to how to defeat the dynamic difficulty, and I got it earlier than Tim did, so I had an easier time of the game. But I didn't know that about the capital ships. I mean, the one mission where I did bring a huge, in fact, I had a constantly shifting, like, okay, what do I build before I go to I think it was the final mission. Like, what do I want to build now? Like, how many of this type versus that type, and getting all the keys right, and like knowing how I was going to deploy, because I had to constantly like react to the mission that I was going to find myself in. But yeah, I mean, I did have several capital ships that I typically wouldn't destroy. They were like the only things, because I was like, yeah, I worked for those, like I don't want to destroy those, and so those were, and so that may have actually also contributed, to me having an easier time towards the end of the game.
That's so cool to hear.
Yeah, it was really fun. I mean, I did not finish it when it came out. We talked about this. It was kind of the last RTS I played. I shifted to be more of a console gamer, where they're not very common. And, this was the last one I played. And I also it was like unfinished business for me. I was so glad to play it on the podcast, because man, this is a game that was so up my alley, and the year it came out, that it was like, I never finished that one. And we decided to play it. It was so great to have a chance to do so.
I think it's really cool.
It's such a memorable setting too. I guess going back to many of the themes we talked about already, but I still, there's definitely some space and science fiction franchises out there that try to. I think Halo still tries to do some of that sort of high science fiction kind of feel, but that's not even what Homeworld is about. And I wanted to come back to something you brought up in the very beginning. And we're short on time, but I do want to talk about the music. It didn't actually, I didn't realize or know, and I'm not musically inclined enough to realize that what song you're talking about there, what composition, but it is such an important part, and I was happy to hear that it was part of your inspiration when you heard it on your clock radio, which nobody has clock radios anymore. Kids out there listening that don't know what that is. Yeah, except for old programmers like you two. But there's still, when I started the game up for the podcast, and it hadn't been a long time since I'd played it, I guess I hadn't played it again since it came out. It was like this sort of, I don't know, this sounds cheesy now that it's coming out of my mouth, but it was sort of like coming home a little bit, right? Because there was this, it's such a unique setting and kind of franchise that it gives you these kind of goosebumps that you don't really get from the hard, heavy metal guitar versions of science fiction. And it was just like a very welcoming, even though it's sorrowful, like you said, and there's sad story, it's just still refreshing after all these years. And I still feel like people are dabbling. I mean, elites out there, like you said, Star Citizen, they're still kind of in that sort of Star Warsy aesthetic in a way. And I still think this, even though you've been inspired by things like Battlestar and stuff, this still stands on its own as a very, I don't know, special tonal piece. So
I mean, especially just the idea that you're being welcomed to the homeworld by people of, like-minded people with the rebellion, and you're like, sort of symbol to them as you come in, is really remarkable. That's not a story we see often, in games, and despite the sort of sorrowful beginnings. And that first, well, I guess it's the third. It's sort of when the planet goes, and and then the cry. I mean, that is gutting. I remember watching. Like, I don't know if it's I don't know if it grabs. Yeah, and then the music kicks in, and I don't know. I guess the camera is grabbed for you, and like it might be one of the cutscenes, and shows the planet just like getting covered with I guess the radiation or whatever.
Fire.
Fire and flames. I mean, it's just like getting demolished, and I'm looking at that and like that's where I come from.
And now all we've got is what we've got.
Oof, it's rough.
Is there, in our final moments, is there any, I mean, I think I can guess at some because you've really maybe been sharing them along the way during the interview. But as we close out here, are there, because, and we didn't get time to talk about, any of your adventures after this, which is fine because we're here to talk about Homeworld. But for Alex today, it sounds like Homeworld and maybe the Relic experience sticks with you. Are there things that you learned or bring with you from Homeworld that are still impacting you today?
Oh yeah, I mean there's lots, but I'll create a bridge with one that really sticks out in particular. So right after we shipped Homeworld, for a lot of reasons, we had an instinct that we had to go build something right away to build on the success of it. And my vision, I was obviously a very novice at everything, novice designer, novice engineer, novice executive, but my vision was, let's take all the tech and let's double down on multiplayer. Let's just keep the story the same. Let's release something in 6 months that's a 100% focused multiplayer. Let's build the richest, deepest end player multiplayer version of Homeworld. We called it Team Homeworld. And you were going to be able to play as a strategist or as a fighter pilot or a frigate pilot. In like you could fly an individual ship, or you could command the whole squadron, and people would work collaboratively together. And ships that are piloted by people would be better than ones that were piloted by AI. Okay, so that was the thing. Team Homeworld.
Sounds good.
And it was going to be totally seminal. And one of the executives at Sierra, Scott had left at this time, said to me, no, you're wrong. You don't understand. You have to redo it from scratch. And so, not knowing any better, we listened to him, and it led to a catastrophe of consequences. And so I guess my takeaway from this is trust your judgment, trust your vision. Don't be afraid to tell people that you're going to do something, even if they feel differently, because at the end of the day, it's your vision, not theirs.
Yeah. Gut. I think we do talk about gut a lot in some of the other interviews, and it's a common, because of the games we're playing on the podcast being so important to our medium. I think a lot of the creators of those games have similar stories, right? It's not the same, and I'm not trying to diminish your story and the importance of your takeaway, but there are those sort of risk-taking moments where you just got to go for it, and your gut does tell you a lot.
Yeah. And your vision is something you're going to hold to, and they just don't, like, their values aren't the same as yours, and what they're looking for is not what you're looking for, especially in a creative life.
There you go.
So.
Well, guys, I can't thank you enough. So fun.
Thank you.
Alex,
we can't thank you enough, Alex.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
No kidding. Man, this has been great. What a great conversation. I did not expect this to go the places it did. So, I guess I should expect that from Homeworld. But thanks so much, Alex. What a terrific hour. Thank you.
Awesome, guys. Thanks a lot.
Welcome back from the break. That was quite an interview. We're super lucky to get that. Amazing conversation. I have to say, nothing that I expected there. I came into that, I'm not sure really what I expected, because I knew from you, I don't have any context for Alex Garden outside of Homeworld, right? I haven't played any other Relic games. I didn't know a lot about his background, and and you had mentioned pre-show that he had had gone and was now an executive. So I was like, not in games anymore. I was like, wow, I don't know who is this guy. Most of the people we've interviewed have been people who are still in and around games. I maybe know more about their career, or whatever. And this was, deep and heartfelt, not to caricature, but not what I think of from an exec. So it was nice.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think well, maybe it was at the break, or maybe it was at the end of the interview, but should have, I guess, occurred to me because of the game, because of Homeworld and what Homeworld is, that there was going to be some more insight than I had anticipated about its origins and the tone and the mood and the themes. But yeah, I had never known Alex, so just read about him. I didn't want to tell this mini story with him on because it feels a little fanboy like. But I remember when Homeworld came out, maybe it's probably like the year after. What year was Deus Ex? Deus Ex was around there, 98 or 2000 or something.
Yeah, it's like 2000.
Yeah. So there was a issue of PC Gamer at some point that came out, and it was an issue. Obviously, we were developers at the time, and obviously we're following all the different trends and developers. And there was I forget what it was, but it was like the class of, or it was like the up and coming youths in game development. And what they did was they had classic like luminaries talk about young developers who were up and coming, who they thought were going to have, a bright future ahead of them.
Was it the new gaming gods? Do you remember that one?
Yeah, maybe that was it.
I remember that being quite a. Oh man, I would love to find that one again.
Yeah,
it was not everyone like.
It was not everyone's favorite thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't want to embarrass Alex with it because I'm sure he would have been not, but my point being is that, like Warren Spector was interviewed there, and he had mentioned Harvey Smith as somebody who was an up and coming. So, take the title of the issue away because Future Gaming Gods is silly. But I will say that it is nice to see where people were, who people were thinking were going to be kind of the up and coming next, and Warren is Warren, so I won't talk about that. But Harvey is still working today, and has become quite, a luminary himself, And Alex was in that episode, is my too long story now, because of the thoughtfulness that they were bringing to Homeworld, and that he was bringing to Homeworld, and that Relic had its kind of overnight success and all that sort of stuff. So I just had kind of always followed him for that reason. And then I think Tim Kaine was in there too.
Oh, interesting.
He would have been older than the rest of them, but I think he was I think Fallout was probably there somewhere. So anyway, long story short, but then, yeah, Alex had his own journey and did some other things after Relic. So he dropped off of the insider game development track. But yeah, he had some great stories to tell. Just really surprising, and I'm glad he was. I'm thankful he was so open and generous with some of those humble beginnings.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it was yeah, like I said, it was a fantastic chat. Yeah, I'm looking at the cover now. The new Game Gods. Oh my God, what a time.
That was the Ion Storm era, kind of like everyone wanted game developers to be rock stars.
Right.
They wanted it. They were trying so hard to make it so. And it's just icky. And I'm sure Alex probably, if I would have brought it up, would have totally rolled his eyes at it.
Yeah, yeah. He might be one of these. It's kind of hard to tell because it's pretty.
Oh no, I think he's on the cover. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're like strips of pictures, not like one big picture of each person. So it's actually hard to like pick out the faces just because they're small in my browser. One of them is Ken Levine. One is Cliff Blazinski. One is that she was she worked at Ion Storm. I think she was even Romero's girl.
Yeah,
kill something.
Casey, I believe.
Yeah, I can't remember. She had been a Quake or Doom.
Yeah.
Like pro player. Yeah.
Do I have it here? Yeah, let's see.
But the others I don't.
Oh no,
recognize.
and the reason is because they had PC Gamer did another, or maybe they did this regularly, where they had gaming gods.
Right.
They had that, and I'm looking at one of those. Hal is there, Will Wright,
Tim
Schafer. A lot of people we've
had on
the podcast.
Yeah.
Larry Holland's there.
Nice.
Roberta Williams is there. Gabe Newell. Yeah. So then what they did is they did a new Gaming Gods follow-up. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
In that same theme, and that was what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
I can't find the cover though.
Yeah, well, I'll send you links.
Oh, yeah. No, I found it. Yeah, that's him.
Yeah.
Okay. He's right next to. He's right next to Casey. Wait, I think her name's Casey. Yeah. So that's. So that's American McGee.
Wow. Okay.
Cliff Blazinski and Alex is the one in the middle.
Wow. That's okay. Wild.
I'm sure he loved it. They're all wearing the same sunglasses or something. It's totally ridiculous.
Yep. Video game magazines of the aughts and the late 90s. Yeah, it was quite a thing. Anyway, I was glad to return to Homeworld a little bit here. I'm still just I'm going to be giddy about this one for a couple of days because it just really wasn't Stevie Case. That was her name.
Stevie Case, right?
I mean, just like the idea of kind of channeling his own place in the universe as it were, and imagining a better life for himself and telling that story, through his video game, which he pitched to like some titans of the industry, at that time. I mean, just remarkable. I wouldn't have been able to speak in a meeting like that at that time, and we're, like I said, we're roughly contemporary. I mean, he started doing stuff earlier than we did, but, in terms of age
12.
and everything, yeah, right. But in terms of like our, he's got to be around our age, and just the idea of going in as a 20 something, maybe late 20s into that group just would have, I wouldn't be able to speak. I would have been so embarrassed. Like, I'm sorry to waste your time. Pay no attention to me.
Yeah, sorry.
This is clearly a mistake. I'm so sorry. So.
Well, like he said, it's like he didn't. There's a side of it where he kind of didn't. The gravity of it wasn't there. I think now right. we hear those names, and that's one thing. But at the time, even but yeah, it's a fascinating story. For sure. And so heartfelt, and I, it's just nice it's nice to even hear how much the inspiration was intangible and story-based, right? For Homeworld. Not just, I want to make a 3D RTS, though that was some of it. It wasn't starting there, though, right? It was coming from other places. Because me over analytical brain of design wise of like, they wanted to crack that nut. And I was like, well, it didn't actually start there exactly.
Yeah.
It's like wanting to tell the story and the music and things.
Yeah, and everything's so cohesive. I've also said it before, and I'll say it again. I always appreciate it tremendously when, especially somebody at the top comes in and like rattles off over a dozen names, over the course of the interview of like, this person did this and this person did that. And, I was in this meeting with these people and, whatever. I bet there were 24 names in there. I will say, as the producer, I hate it for the show notes because I have to go look all these people up and make sure I get their names right, which is always tricky. I've definitely had ones where I'm like, I think it's this, but some of them are tricky.
People appreciate your extra effort.
Yeah.
There.
But no, I mean, I really appreciate it as a person, who contributes myself, right? As, never a person who's been at the top of a project. I really appreciate, and look for the people who know everybody they worked with, who, and rattle their names off and don't take credit for every single thing, there's that famous, I don't know, it was probably also PC Gamer, often quoted thing about Warren Spector, who says, games aren't just made by one person, said Warren Spector, the creator of Deus Ex, right? I mean, it's the classic quote about this. But I also just always appreciate and honestly look for in collaborators, people who bring names and specifics to the table. And he did that in absolute spades. So kudos as well for that. So, all right. Well, great interview. Thanks for getting him on board. That was, I'm so glad. I didn't expect to be able to go back to have an interview with Homeworld. So it's so good.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a nice treat for people.
Yep.
Unexpected treat. For
sure. All right. Well, let's get our outro going here. We don't do reviews after interviews. We did, or email for that matter. We do have one in the hopper that's got tons of good questions in it, so I look forward to reading that soon. Actually, might in the order in which things come out, we may have already done it. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram at devgameclub. Or you can occasionally find us twitching at twitch.tv/Brett Duville or twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end. So
now I remembered that we've got all these other things.
Thank you. Good work.
I'm working on it. We also have a fan Discord, fan run, fan setup, fan populated Discord with over 100 folks there, maybe pushing on 200. I don't actually know what the numbers are lately, but there's always a good conversation going on there. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, that Discord, our merch store, all by Mark Garcia, with help from others there on the Discord. Have fun packing up your cryogenically frozen comrades this week, and good night.
Good night.